So now that you've got a location, you need a problem, and the problem can be just about anything. The problem is usually a dungeon, right? The problem is that there is a hole in the ground with some treasure in it and some monsters, which is a fine problem to have if you're an adventurer. But the problem can be more than that, right? It can be that it's just a ruin and they have to go in, but it can also be an active problem. It is the lair of some humanoids or a big monster. It could be a cave, where maybe there's a smallish dragon that's been terrorizing travelers or merchants or whatever, and trying to maybe it's very young and it's trying to grow its hoard. It's trying to maximize its ability. Maybe it makes itself seem more important than it is. Maybe it is a relatively weak monster, but it's pretending to be something more vicious, and it's all full of bluster, and the players can actually bluff it out. There's a couple of different ways you could go with that. I once had a green dragon named Vert, who would stop characters in the middle of the forest and demand their money. And then it was a very young, small green dragon, but it was still a green dragon, and and the players gave up their copper pieces or whatever, and Vert went away. And then when they finally got to the village, the villagers all chuckled, "Oh yeah, that's old Vert. He's a youngin. He's just trying to get his gold for his hoard. We all know him." So the players end up feeling a little silly, but you can play around with it and make it fun like that. But the idea is it doesn't have to be a cave or a dungeon. It could be a wizard's tower. It could be a ruined keep. It could be a ruined manor house. It could be an actively used manor house. If your campaign is going to be less of exploration and more of negotiation and role playing, then the problem could be you have to deal with this local lord who's maybe the lord is oppressively taxing the villagers. Maybe and that's the problem that the PCs have to deal with. Maybe he's got a hand. Not all lords have huge armies. He could have 20 soldiers, and and that's about it. And he's got a manor house, and and he's the rightful lord, so he's going to collect taxes. And the PCs have to deal with that reality. Maybe it's as simple as that. Every adventure doesn't have to be a dungeon crawl. It can be all kinds of different things if you want it to be. Maybe there's a divine revelation. Maybe there's a divine figure has appeared nearby at a shrine, and maybe that's the problem. Maybe the PCs are sent there by the ecclesiastical authorities from another village to determine whether or not this was legit or not. You could turn that into a whole big thing. That could be a lot of fun. As long as you have one or two, maybe a cleric or a paladin in the party, representing the officials, you could do a lot with that, and that's okay. That's a problem. That is a legit problem for the PCs to solve. That's their mission. They're going there to do that. So there's all kinds of ways you can do this. It doesn't have to be a gilded hole. It can be something that's designed to be role played around. It's just something. Maybe it's a puzzle. Maybe something was stolen. Those are the kinds of problems that PCs can solve. Every dungeon, every adventure doesn't have to be a hole in the ground. And that's the important takeaway here. Although I love me a hole in the ground. But not every adventure can be the gilded hole. And now you need a reason for the players to care. Right? It's one thing if the local lord in the manor house with his 20 guards is oppressively taxing the villagers. Fine. The PCs show up, they're at the tavern. What do they care about local tax rates? But if they personalize it, if you as the DM personalize it, and then it gives the PCs a reason to act. So, for example, they're the PCs come into this small village. They go to the tavern. They get a room in the attic or whatever, and they're in the they're in the beer hall, and they're interacting with the villagers. You do some role playing, you do some conversations and stuff, and the bartender starts complaining about the taxation, and then some of the NPCs chime in, and yes, and you kind of the idea is you want to turn the NPCs into characters that that the PCs have a little empathy with, and a way to do this is to change their behavior towards the PCs, right? So maybe they're friendly the first night, the PCs arrive. Maybe, they're all boisterous and friendly and everybody's laughing. And then the next night, everybody's all quiet and sullen and glaring and stuff, and they don't interact much with the PCs. And of course, the PCs are going to wonder, what did we do? And then it turns out, oh no, the tax collector came this afternoon and announced that the taxes are being doubled or whatever, and we only have a month to pay, so we don't know what we're going to do. Our families are going to starve. That makes it a little more personal with the PCs. Same thing, that you can do when you're on a mission. Let's say you're on let's talk about the clerical mission to investigate the apparition at a shrine. So the church has sent these, the adventurers over there to find out whether it's legitimate or not. The cleric, it's his first assignment. He wants to look good, and they approach the shrine. The old cleric who tends the shrine is very pious, and he's absolutely convinced that yes, this was real, and he's so effusive towards the young cleric, and he's giving him all kinds of you take my room, I'll sleep out here, and he's being very unctuous towards the cleric who's there to see whether or not the thing is real. And then over the course of the investigation, it turns out that the apparition was in fact a fake, concocted by somebody else to drum up business for their, for whatever business they have, selling trinkets outside the shrine. And but over the course of the adventure, the players get the real impression it would break the old man's heart to find that out. So that gives them a moral dilemma. What are you going to do? Are you going to tell the truth to the church that sent you there, or are you going to personally devastate this kindly old man? It's a for the right kind of players and the right kind of characters, that could be a really cool, really emotional role playing experience. That would be a wonderful thing. And if you do want to do the Gilded Hole, something I did a long time ago was I had a whole big dwarven city that was wiped out by plague, a century ago, and the PCs find out, how to get there, and they learn that there's a magic key that they need to open the gates to the city, and they get to the location of the gates, and there's this one little hut with a dwarf in there, and you see he's got hundreds of keys on his walls, and it turns out that he is the last survivor of the dwarven city, and he's just sitting there, and if they try to talk to him about it, he's just very haunted, and he in his make this just very hollow voice, and he's looking down, and he's miserable, and he's obviously wrenched with survivor's guilt because he survived the plague and no one else in the city did. So I turned that into a really gut wrenching performance for the benefit of the players, and they loved it. And you can turn a simple encounter, even to just get into the dungeon, can get turned into this thing that really gets the players invested in it. And now you're not just doing it because you want to get rich. You're doing it for the gatekeeper. You're doing it for him to help him justify his survival. There's all kinds of great stuff you can do like that. But the idea is, give the players a reason to become invested, other than, oh, there's treasure in there, which is not in and of itself a bad thing. If the motive is, okay, well, we're young, we're in our first outings as adventurers. The magic user, his mentor told him one day offhandedly about some old archmage who had a fortress nearby, and all that's left are is the dungeon of the fortress. And then they go find it, and they know that there's treasures within, and the magic user wants the spell books so he can, that is a perfectly acceptable, and that is a time honored one. I would stay away from the trope of you all meet in a tavern. I think it's much better that the player characters know each other already. But it's equally important that they don't start in the place that they come from. So if you grew up in Village A, it would be really difficult for the DM to really make that place live, because they're going to assume they know everyone, and they know everything, and they know everywhere. But if you remove them from that familiar environment and you take them to village B, which is 10 miles down the road, they might not, they might know a few people. They might have been there once, they might, so that you can give them a map or whatever, but they won't know it nearly as well as they do their hometown. So you've got them out of their comfort zone and into a place where they have to do a little exploring and a little talking, a little detective work to find out what's going on. That is a much, much better layup for the first adventure for a new campaign. So, and there we have it, part 3 of my series. Hope you're enjoying the ride. Please do let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to think about this episode. Any tips that you have for beginner DMs in Greyhawk, please, I'd love to see them down in the comments. Hope you're all having a wonderful, wonderful day, and I'll talk to you all later. Thanks for watching today's video. Please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Below you'll find links to my Patreon, which helps make these videos possible. You'll also find the web store where you can buy my books, and my blog where you'll find all sorts of free downloads and other articles. Thanks, and have a great day. Well, there ain't no place like a hole in the ground, a hole in the ground, a hole in the ground. There ain't no place like a hole in the ground where there's not in a scuba crawling around.